everyone, my name is Sandeep and I'm the co-founder of Hashnode. Welcome to another episode of the Commit Podcast. Today I have with me Paul Copplestone of Supabase. Supabase is an open source alternative to Firebase and is one of the fastest growing open source companies out there. Today I'm going to ask Paul several questions ranging from their origin story to how they hire and retain the best talent. It's going to be fun. Let's welcome Paul. Hey Paul, how are you doing?
Hey,
Welcome to Commit.
good. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Amazing, exciting. So just for the listeners, why don't we start by introducing you and Supabase?
Sure. We can start, I guess, with myself. So I am a developer as well, actually. I'm from New Zealand originally, and then I've moved around a lot. So moved to Southeast Asia for a few years to do startups, and then eventually, worked in an accelerator, went to an accelerator to do some startups, and I met my co-founder now. He was working on another business. We lived together for a year in Singapore, and then eventually, when I wanted to start Supabase, then I sort of tapped him on the shoulder and convinced him to join me. And so Supabase, what it is an open source Firebase alternative. That's at least the positioning. What we really are is a Postgres hosting company, and then we provide a few tools on top of Postgres to make it incredibly easy to use. The other thing to call out actually is that we're completely open source. So all of the tools that we use are either MIT or Apache 2 or Postgres licensed. And we try to use existing tools wherever possible so that it boosts the ecosystem. And if the tools don't exist, then we'll create them ourselves and we'll sort of open source them.
Thanks, Paul. I think this is really interesting that you position yourself as an open source alternative to Firebase. But just to go back to the origin story, was that always the motivation? Was that the driving factor behind creating Supabase?
Actually, the thing that I sold Anton was actually like what we kind of wanted was a bit more like an app store on top of Postgres, because Postgres is incredibly extensible. That's kind of the pitch that I gave him. Essentially, you've got all these extensions, and we'll just make it really easy to turn on and off these extensions and have custom interfaces, things like this. So we'd boost the ecosystem of Postgres. I took a lot of inspiration there from actually Kong. Kong do this very well. They're an API gateway, and they've got these kind of plugins that you turn on and off, and it's a declarative kind of schema. So that's kind of the model that I wanted to go, and I thought they were doing a very good job in the open source. The positioning of the Firebase alternative actually started as an accident because we, the really sort of early origin stories was that I was using Firebase. I was using it for my startup, and we had this chat within a mobile application, and it just wasn't scaling. So I migrated it to Postgres, but I needed the real-time interface that Firebase provide. And so I ended up building an Elixir server on top of Postgres, and I open sourced it, and it started gaining some traction. And from there, we had this positioning real-time Postgres, and it just kind of wasn't sticking. And then one day we changed it to the open source Firebase alternative, and it went to the top of Hacker News and started getting a lot of love. And we kind of had to stick with that positioning because everyone just assumed that's what we were building. So it's now kind of open source Firebase alternative in spirit, but we're not doing a one-to-one mapping. We're really focused on Firestore especially, and it's just making the database Postgres incredibly scalable and easy to use.
Nice. Thanks for explaining that. And like I said, Supabase is probably one of the fastest growing open source companies out there. And I think you recently crossed 60,000 stars on GitHub.
I think we might have just done it today, yeah.
I was checking today, and I think you have crossed 60K, which is amazing, and congrats on that.
Thank you.
So I'd like to ask you, how has this open source community shaped initial development of Supabase? Are there any specific insights or learnings that you can share with us?
Yeah, so I really think we do things a little bit differently. So some things that are different and some things that are the same with most open source. So different is that, we've really got this community of communities feel. So Postgres, but we also employ the maintainer of Postgres. We try to support existing tools. So we give a lot of sponsorships to extension maintainers, sometimes employ them as well. Then the other one is that, well, how does it sort of work with other open source in a very similar pattern? Is that very often with open source, if you've got users of a product and they're missing a feature, they can come in and contribute that feature. So we've got a lot of stories around this, which I'm happy to get into if you want. And they really help shape the product. This year especially, there's been some good improvements from the community that have sort of set the direction of Supabase as well.
Nice. That's super exciting. Can you share any inside stories or any fun facts that general public do not know yet?
Yeah, so on that positioning and really helping us shape the ecosystem. So actually, at the start of this year, we had a contributor come in and he's actually sent me an email, and he had submitted a pull request to our Postgres repo, and he had pushed PG Vector as a PR, and he just sent this email saying, "Hey, I really need PG Vector for my application that I'm building, and I've already submitted the PR and done the work. Would you mind would you mind merging it?" And so actually I jumped on a call with him, I think that day, and we talked through his use case, and this was very early on. I think it was January this year. And so the use case seemed very cool, and we merged it, I think the next day, so it took 2 days to get it in. Then I said to him, well, why don't you help us build some examples so that people can see it? And he ended up building the first version of what we called Clippy, which is the chat with your docs. And we called it Clippy because at the time, no one was doing it. And so we wanted people to understand what it was. And we were also extremely afraid that the generative responses were going to be completely false. And so we wanted to set the bar very low. I don't know if you remember Microsoft Clippy was this useless assistant, which always got things wrong. So we wanted to make it a bit of a meme. And so we called it Clippy. And then actually, of course, this use case has become incredibly popular this year. And we've had Mozilla as well use Supabase for MDN to do the same thing. And of course, there are plenty of startups doing generative RAG across their docs.
That's really cool. And since we're talking about hiring from the community itself, I think that plays out really well for us as well. Since we are also building a developer community, we always try to hire from the community itself. And there are a couple of instances where people just ping me on Discord and they report some bugs, right, continuously. Mm-hmm. And what I've done is that in the past, I go back to them and I tell them, why don't you join the company and you help me fix these things? So that way we have hired a couple of people as well.
They join, they fix them, then they leave. That's always the risk. No, I think like we've got this term internally, too good to ignore. I think like when you've got these contributors that are just amazing, then of course you want to hire them. What is the sort of things that they generally, like what do you see in the community that they're actually fixing? Is it docs fixes or are they actual product fixes? Or in what way do you really appreciate it?
Yeah, I think so. We recently launched something called Hashnode Headless, which helps people create their own front ends using Hashnode's public APIs. So people always send pull requests improving that open source starter kit. It's powered by Next.js and Tailwind. So we see a lot of contributions there. And of course, people always fix the typos, fix the docs, keep improving it. So that's always appreciated and saves us so much time.
Do you get many now people like what I call busy fixes? Like now that AI is becoming a thing, people are coming into our repos and just asking Copilot, how can I improve this section? And they just refactor something so that they can contribute to open source. Are you getting much of this?
Yeah. A lot of times, I mean, the whole thing around ChatGPT and AI in general has removed barrier of entry so much that everyone can actually do the at least the basic fixes, right? By this, do you also see similar trends in your community?
Yeah. We're seeing a lot of it, and I see people putting videos on how to do this. I actually
Wow.
quite like it because it's a very easy way for people to get in. The only thing is that our team is not big enough to keep up with the PRs and the issues that are sort of created. So it makes it a bit harder. I think we need to rethink how to do open source a little bit in this new paradigm, and we also need, I guess, like some review bots or something like that to help
Ah,
us get through the PRs. Yeah.
yeah. Okay. So the AI powered review bot, which does the first line of review.
Yeah,
And
something like that. Yeah.
all right, okay, that's interesting. Okay. So I have another question. Since you started Supabase, do you see any specific trends around the whole managed databases and backend as a service ecosystem? Do you see any specific patterns emerging there?
I think the main pattern is that Postgres is dominating. That's, I
Okay.
think, pretty obvious to most. In this most recent Stack Overflow survey,
Yeah.
Postgres became the most popular database in the world. It overtook MySQL. And actually, even in the backend as a service, there's two types of backend as a service, in my opinion. There's the ones, well, actually, uh, we do it slightly different in that we give you a full Postgres database and then we build some toolings on top. But the ones who are more traditional backend as a service, they generally build a abstraction layer on top of the database. That database that they're building on top of typically is Postgres as well. There's a couple that don't, like SQLite as well. I think is very interesting and is getting a lot of traction. So um, those backend as a services service startups are also very cool.
Sure, sure. And just for our listeners, do you have any thoughts on why Postgres is actually winning over MySQL?
Yeah, it's largely because of the sort of vibrancy of the community, and then second, the extensibility. It's
Okay,
very easy to get involved in terms of writing extensions. It's very pluggable. It's rock solid. It's got a consistent cadence of development releases, and now it's well supported by all the clouds. Basically,
sure,
RDS, we work closely with the AWS team. It's well supported by Azure and GCP.
sure. And Supabase does Postgres hosting, right? And do you intend to keep focusing on solely on Postgres, or are there any plans to expand as well?
No, it's just going to be Postgres indefinitely, and we're planning to push it as hard as we can. So now we're
Okay,
seeing a lot of AI and vector workloads, and we want to
okay,
make sure that that's scalable. And we did a lot of work this year to make sure that PG Vector is as performant and more performant now than Pinecone. And it's a good alternative to specialized vector databases. We released the HNSW index with Andrew, the maintainer of PG Vector, and the RDS team. We worked on that. And then the next iterations are just to make sure it's kind of infinitely scalable. So, how do we, make it as cloud native as possible, really? Without doing a fork, we want to make sure that everything that we do to make it scalable is upstreamed into Postgres itself, so that it's accessible to everyone and doesn't, lock developers into Supabase in any way.
perfect. So you'll just capitalize on the Postgres growth, and you'll just hammer it.
We have this really strong thesis that uh, Postgres is going to be the dominant database over time, and
Okay.
what we're seeing is that you can look at some of the trends. Postgres started as a relational database only, and
Yeah.
then NoSQL came out, and then very quickly, Postgres provided JSON-B, and so actually you can store NoSQL in Postgres, and then it's got time series extensions, and now it's got vector extensions, and what we're seeing is that this generalized system is kind of all you need to get started, and for 90% of businesses and
Yeah.
business use cases, it actually makes sense. The next iteration of that is making sure that it's sort of scalable in a way that can store infinite amounts of data. As an example, If you truly believe that AI is going to be the thing, which we do, then you can imagine that vectors are going to be almost the dominant data type for all of AI. So everything in the world needs to be turned into an embedding. And so to do this, you need to store a lot of data. And we need to make sure that there are systems in place for storing that data, say in S3, in a way that's accessible to Postgres, but also cheap for developers. They can't be storing, everything on disk. It needs to be maybe a tiered system. So we're starting to get into the depths of Postgres to make sure that that is possible.
That's interesting. That's nice. So since we spoke a little bit about AI, I would like to ask you some follow-up questions around that. So with all the recent advancements with AI, I think you were really quick to launch Postgres Vector database and your AI toolkit, right? So how did you move that fast, and how did you decide that you would want to build that?
Well, the first thing to call out is that it came from the community. That story that I told was actually this guy, Greg, who funnily enough now works in our company. He was too good to ignore. So after he did all that work, we employed him to work full time. We're also quite a small team, I think, comparative to our impact, I would say. So we're 70 people in total, which means that we keep this agility within the organization, around 40 engineers, and we have many different products. The way that we can continue to move fast is to give people full autonomy of each of those products. So, it isn't sort of a big company shift. It's just really iterating on these products. And the way that I think in terms of the products and is that we just want to provide the primitives to allow us to move fast. So Postgres is one of those primitives. You can add extensions. We also have edge functions. And so, you can iterate on each one of these. We've got auth. So we're just providing developers with key primitives. And then you can package these primitives in ways that will actually go with any trend. So for example, I have a small thesis that next year, actually, there'll be a lot of geospatial work for VR and AR glasses as Apple starts to push into it. How would you do this in this new paradigm? You'd probably want to use a spatial data system like PostGIS. This is actually PostGIS is one of the most popular GIS systems in the world and is already built into Postgres. So we can package this in a way that kind of gives developers a developer kit so that they can actually start moving down this path themselves.
Sure. So it looks like a good framework for any founder can be that you look at what's going to be the trend in next 10 years or so, have a really long-term view, and then kind of work backwards to it. Is that also something that you do?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, not every business has to be like ours, right? That's the first thing. You can build a SaaS business, which is very niche, very focused, indie developer. Now, not every company should aspire to be, a 1,000-person company. It's a very deliberate path. If you are going to take that path, then yes, you've got no option but to what we say skate where the puck is going in ice hockey. So you have to look where the market's going to be, and you want to be there sort of at the right time. Some of the best vector databases at the moment were around for a couple of years before this sort of trend happened, and they've capitalized very well on this trend. So, but there are infinite opportunities in the world, and you don't have to be this type of company. You can really look at what is only going to solve a few people's needs for the next couple of years, and there's plenty of opportunity within that space as well.
Cool. I think that's fair. Okay, so coming back to a different kind of question, and which is also one of my personal favorites, and I've been meaning to ask you this for a long time, which is launch weeks, right? I think you were the first one to introduce launch weeks, and I'm when I see you launch things on Twitter, I'm personally very fascinated. And I would like to ask you, how do you go about organizing this launch weeks? How do you develop things in a way that those things can be shipped during that launch week? And uh, also, a related question, do you also do internal hackathons in some way to build these features? What are your learnings and insights?
Yeah, there's a lot to dig into. I guess launch weeks are not so much well, the way I think about it is they're not so much just an event; they're a sort of way to run the company, which is the way that we sort of gear up all of our product development. So, for example, several months ago we had our launch week, and then we take a little bit of a break and we fix all the bugs and things, and then we start gearing up for the next launch week, which I think is dropping today if you're listening to this podcast. So please do go check it out. So, how do we do it? It's kind of this 3-month cycle. And what we think of for launch weeks is more like a fixed timeline variable scope. Each one of those teams that's operating autonomously is off doing their work, and they're trying to plan out what they're going to ship 3 months ago. Then they'll start moving towards these major features. They know that the launch week's going to come up, and they're starting to work towards this one deadline. Usually they've got 3 or 4 features that they want to ship. And then as we start getting closer, some of them just drop out, and some new ones come in opportunistically. Then about a month before launch week, I start this sort of launch week page where we brainstorm, okay, what are going to be the top 5? And it used to be that there were just 5 features, but now actually I think I saw on this one we've got something like 25 features that really could be launch week candidates. And it's more about shuffling and the narrative and writing the blog posts. So now we've got the 5 key features locked in for this week. And then we've got, I think, the 20 others that are just going to be shipped incrementally. And sometimes it's blog posts that are on the periphery or minor features. And actually, for the past 2 weeks, I've been shipping things that I don't, and sort of announcing things that I think are super interesting, but they will get drowned out by the noise of launch week. So we're just shipping them early, and some things will leave till next week. But it's all really about shaping a good narrative now around, what are the things that developers have really asked for, and making sure that we deliver it to them in a way that they can use immediately, and then give us feedback for the next launch week.
That's cool. You said you start the work 3 months back, right? 3 months before the launch week happens. So how does that work? Do you have a separate roadmap for the launch week and separate one for the product, or is that just one roadmap?
No, it's all the same. So we're really autonomous. Each of the product teams has a product owner, and really the teams can just be one person, actually. So, for example, on our storage team, it's kind of one person, and then a few people float in and out. And our auth team that one has 3 because there's a lot of work to do. Real time, one person. We've got a lot of Elixir, so each one of these teams has one. And they kind of own the product, and they tell us what features, based on the feedback that they're getting from the community, they tell us what features they're going to be shipping. So we just funnel a lot of feedback from the app, feedback from support tickets, feedback from GitHub. All of it goes to the product teams. And then it's up to them to figure out how to prioritize the burning features for launch week.
Sure. And I think it's always tough to narrow down the number of features, number of candidates for this launch weeks, right? I also have a similar story to share. We recently did an internal hackathon at Hashnode, and we're also a really, really small team. And we initially wanted to build just 10 features, but we ended up having 15 or more, right? So, and then in the end, we have to just really, really take hard decisions to just narrow down to 10 features, and we just eventually ship them. But I always find this part challenging. That how do you narrow down the candidates?
That's Actually, yeah, an important distinction, right? Because as well, if you have too much free reign, I mean, even for myself, right? I am always interested in working on new things, but the truth is that building a good startup is just a lot of schlep. For example, on the auth server, there's just a checklist of things that we need to do to get to parity with, say, AWS Cognito.
Yeah.
And so we know what those are. And because it's known, it doesn't seem as cool or as fun as, say, oh, let's build some AI features or something that's fresh and new. So actually, uh, we say this internally, the startup that wins is the one that's willing to do the most schlep. And it might seem boring, but actually, that's the thing that users really appreciate. I did a tweet the other day where we had just put some checkboxes on the auth server, on the auth section of our dashboard, which allows sort of sessions to be like auto logged out after a period of time. And the auth team kind of sort of shipped it and didn't really announce, thought it wouldn't be that important, but it was really popular because it's the things that people actually need and have to use, right? So there's a reason why these schlep tasks are often the most appreciated.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. And are you still closely associated with the engineering side of things?
Yep. So I try to do a lot of the product work, but to be honest, the engineers that we have in our company are much better than I am. So I'll just jump in and make sure that they're unblocked as much as possible,
Yeah.
and I will, help shape the product. We talked a lot about the primitives that we need to provide, so making sure that they're designed in a way that will allow it to be extensible in the future, and helping to prioritize or just think about things. So, yeah, when it comes to engineering these days, I'm effectively useless, and if I start a task, often I'm distracted by something else that's going on in the business or fundraising or something else. So it's a bit of a liability if I'm coding myself.
So I read in a book recently that a good hiring it looks like hiring yourself, right? If you hire good people, then you are basically useless, and which is
Mhm.
what the founder's job is, right?
Yeah, well, hopefully even hiring people that are better than you. There's this really great article on this one. It's called "Give Away Your Lego," and
Okay.
especially when you're in a startup, the early stages you are kind of doing everything right, and it's a bit
Yeah.
painful because you end up hiring someone and there's this thing that you really want to do. Like I
Yeah.
just want to code all day, quite honestly,
Yeah.
but it's not the most effective use of my time. So, you have to it's kind of like when you're a kid and you're playing with your Lego, and then another kid comes along and you have to share your Lego with them. And actually, it's another thing the company that can do that right, or the early employees that can do that the most effectively, will grow the fastest.
Sure, sure. I remember that when I started Hashnode, I was a sole engineer at that time, and
Mhm,
I had a really difficult time getting used to the fact that I can give the control to the next set of engineers and
mhm,
not worry about anything. For me, that was the hardest part.
mhm.
That the company can function without me, and I'm not that important actually.
Yeah.
Pretty high.
It's funny. Yeah, there's every founder has to go through that
Yeah,
transition and eventually make a business that operates kind of without them. That's kind of the goal that I see in my mind, and we're not there yet. But hopefully, in a few years, we'll be in a situation where it can really be just a complete company, independent of me.
sure, sure. And on a similar note, how do you really ensure that you hire the best talent? I think hiring is still probably the most difficult job for any founder. You have to get the team right. So how do you what kind of traits or characteristics do you look for in somebody, and how do you hire them?
Yeah, I think first of all, I think every company is different. They've got a different culture, right? So I'd be curious to ask you about yours as well.
Sure.
But for us, we're fully remote. We're fully distributed. We have one meeting per week for the product teams. So it's really as distributed as you can get. So the first thing the first trait that we look for is like extremely independent, extremely autonomous, have to be able to work on their own and enjoy that type of work. It's not for everyone, quite honestly. And a lot
Yeah.
of people in the past couple of years think that they like remote work, but then they work at Supabase and they realize, they don't really like it as distributed as we like to do it. So a lot of asynchronous communication, writing, um, very little face-to-face time. The other things that are important in this type of environment are that you need to be very intellectually honest, that you're always working on the right thing. You need to be very egoless because you often will suggest a feature, and then once you've made that suggestion in your brain, it feels like the best thing. But of course, the first idea is never the best. So, people will come in with feedback, and you need to be very adaptive to that feedback, and that takes a lot of egolessness to adapt to that. So these are a few of the traits that we look for when we're hiring. The way that we do hiring is that we do it one at a time. So instead of just saying, we need to grow the team to 20, we actually just work until there's a position in the company that is completely neglected, or there's so much work going on there that we can't do it. And then we define the job spec for that, and we scour the earth to find the best person for that particular role. And so it's not so much we've got a quota to fill, but we've got a problem to fix.
Sure.
How do you do it? I'm very curious about your culture internally and how you do hiring.
Yeah, sure. So for me, the one thing that has worked the best is to have a culture doc written somewhere so that you can share that beforehand with somebody when you're interviewing them. For the longest time, I didn't realize the importance of a culture doc. In my head, I know that I want to hire people who have a CEO mentality, or who have a founder oriented mentality. But eventually these things do not work out that well, because if you're not able to communicate that before you hire people, eventually it doesn't work out that well. So the best part of putting together a culture doc is that you can share that before you hire them, so that they have the expectation clear, and they know what is expected of them, and they know that it's not a 9-to-5 job. They know that they will be expected to behave like a CEO. And for me, that has done wonders.
So hard work is obviously one of them on your culture doc. What else is there?
So we highlight two things. You have to have a CEO mentality, and you should have a sense of urgency, because in our company we want to ship things really fast, and we want to have a sense of urgency, and we want to make sure that we don't. If something can be done in a day, we want to do it in a day, not in a week. So having a CEO mentality plus having a sense of urgency are the two most important things that we look for.
I like it. Very important. We also say this, so CEO mentality, I think, is a great framing. We say as well, manager of one. So you've got to be able to, do it yourself. But I think CEO mentality is something I'm going to adopt. Thanks.
Cool. I'm glad. So I always tell everyone that we don't want to micromanage anyone, right? We don't want people have to manage themselves, and they should come to us not to seek any direction, but they should come to us to get approvals done. So we'll just unblock them, and we'll get out of their way to so that they can do the best work. And we never ever want to micromanage anyone. So which is why you must have CEO mentality, otherwise it won't work.
Nice.
Cool. All right. This has been great episode so far. So let me ask you one last question. So what's next for Supabase? Are there any upcoming features or partnerships or anything else that you are excited about?
Well, the most obvious thing to call out, I guess, is that this week we're doing a launch week. So there are a lot of new things coming. 5 major features. We'll drop one every day for the entire week. And actually, we've got too many to launch this week. So it's not just going to be 5 features. We'll intersperse it with a few other features throughout the week, and usually we wrap up the week with, a few more things. So if you want, please do check out supabase.com/launch week, and or just go to our homepage or our GitHub and find us on Twitter. And there's a lot of cool stuff coming. I'm incredibly excited about this launch week.
Cool. I hope you had a hard time choosing those candidates for the launch week.
Yeah, it was very hard actually to shape them. So, and the thing about our launch week is we try to make sure that each of those 5 features are things that will accelerate your building cycles. So if you're a builder and you want to build faster, each one of these things hopefully will give you just essentially more tools to build faster or build better and build bigger. And they should be usable. We've got a free tier, and it's incredibly cost effective compared to all the alternatives, because we provide an entire backend. Then if you're wanting to build an entire business, then I can guarantee that there's no cheaper way to do it than to start with Supabase.
Amazing. I'm sure it's going to be exciting. So all the best for your launch week. And thanks Paul for spending time with me, and thanks for all the amazing insights you've shared today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.